Eloise sometimes wondered how many lives had flickered out unnoticed, for lack of a single moment of recognition. The thought both haunted and propelled her. She refused to let her second chance shrink into comfort or complacency. If she had been invisible once, she would spend the rest of her life making sure others felt vividly, unmistakably real. One early evening, as she prepared for the Literacy Initiative's first gala, she paused to look around the old library they'd converted into their headquarters. Soft lamplight illuminated shelves brimming with new books, and in a far corner, a teenage boy she'd recruited was assembling a display of student essays. He had come from a halfway house, wary and mute as a stray cat, but she recognized the same hunger she once carried in her bones. Now, he looked up at her and nodded, a silent testament to how quickly a person's story could transform with a little faith. She adjusted the cuffs of her borrowed dress, navy blue, understated, and checked the watch Marcus had given her, engraved with a single word on the back, Resurge. She traced the letters absently as she thought about the first time she had held Ivy. It had been 2 weeks after she started, when Marcus asked her to sit with the baby during a board meeting. Ivy had curled her tiny hand around Eloise's finger, warm and astonishingly strong. In that small gesture, she felt something inside her finally stitch back together. When Marcus entered the room now, he looked tired in the way only new parents did, but also gratified. His eyes traveled over the banners, the stacks of books, the simple refreshments, and landed on Eloise with something close to wonder. "You've built something remarkable," he said quietly. "We've built it," she corrected, though in her heart she couldn't help but feel ownership, like a gardener who finally sees the first bloom after years of barren soil. Guests began to arrive, donors in crisp suits, librarians from underfunded districts, teachers with bright eyes and frayed collars. Eloise greeted each of them personally, shaking hands, thanking them not just for their money, but for believing that literacy could be a way out, a ladder rising from any depth. When she stepped up to the microphone, the small crowd hushed. She glanced at Marcus, who stood at the back with Ivy propped against his shoulder. The baby's cheeks were rosy, her gaze fixed on Eloise with that same curiosity that had once cracked her open. "I used to believe that once you lost everything," she began, voice steady, "you became something less. A ghost. A burden. A mistake that the world quietly agreed to look away from. But then someone saw me. Not as a problem to fix or a cause to pity, but as a person who still had something to give." She paused to let the words breathe. "Tonight isn't just about books or grants. It's about the idea that no matter how far we fall, we are never beyond reclamation. And that when we choose to see one another, truly see each other, we become something more powerful than any loss." Applause filled the room, warm and unforced. Eloise didn't shy away from it. She accepted it, the way a survivor accepts air after surfacing from deep water. Afterward, as the guests mingled and the first donations came in, she stepped aside to gather herself. Marcus approached with Ivy asleep against his chest. "You spoke beautifully," he said. "I was terrified," she admitted, brushing her fingers over the baby's soft hair. "That's usually how you know it matters," he said, voice low. They stood in companionable silence, watching as a young teacher cried quietly over a stack of donated materials for her classroom. "I never asked," Marcus said eventually, "what you thought that first night when I gave you my card." Eloise smiled faintly. "I thought you were a little crazy." He laughed under his breath. "Fair enough. But," she continued, "mostly I thought, maybe this is the moment. The pivot in my story. And I couldn't bear the idea of walking away without finding out if I was right." Marcus shifted Ivy gently. "I think we both needed that night. You needed a chance. And I needed to remember that all this," he gestured to the books, the people, the hope that hummed in the air, "is why I started building anything in the first place." Eloise felt a curious ache then, not of sorrow, but of gratitude so large it pressed against her ribs. A soft chime drew her attention to her phone, another pledge notification. She glanced at it, her breath catching when she saw the donor's note. "For every girl who believes she is invisible." She set the phone down, feeling the old pieces of her life, grief, failure, shame, receding further each day, like a storm finally moving out to sea. When she looked at Marcus again, she thought of the moment he had stopped on the sidewalk, a millionaire with nothing to prove except that kindness was still possible. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice thick. He shook his head. "Thank you." Later, long after the last guest departed and the library quieted, Eloise stayed behind to tidy up. She walked the aisles between the shelves, running her fingertips over the spines of books she'd once taught, books that had saved her in college dorms and hospital waiting rooms. It struck her that words had always been her anchor, and now they were her gift back to the world. She turned off the lights one by one, pausing at the door to look over the room that felt more like a home than any place she had known in years. She knew there would still be setbacks, nights of doubt, days when the old fear returned, whispering that it could all be taken away again. But she also knew she was not the same woman who had sat alone in the cold. She was someone who had been chosen, trusted, and believed in. Someone who had chosen to believe back. Eloise closed the door behind her with a final, soft click that seemed to echo through her entire being. As she stepped out onto the steps of the library, she inhaled the cool night air, feeling it fill her lungs in a way that made her aware of every heartbeat. The city lights glimmered across the glass facade, reflecting 1,000 fractured versions of herself, each one a reminder of how far she had come. She walked down the steps, her shoes striking the stone with a quiet confidence she could hardly have imagined a year ago. She paused at the bottom, looking up at the carved inscription above the doors. Knowledge is freedom. It struck her now with a kind of clarity that knowledge had saved her, yes, but so had something even rarer, someone willing to see her when no one else dared. The street was nearly empty, just the whisper of passing cars and the occasional scatter of dry leaves across the sidewalk. She stood for a moment, feeling that same hush that had filled her the night Marcus first stopped in front of her, Ivy nestled against his chest. In that moment, he had been a stranger, an impossible figure in polished shoes and an expensive coat. But he had spoken to her like she was someone worth the effort. And now, standing here, she realized something she had never dared to believe. She was worth the effort. She always had been. A quiet laugh slipped past her lips, the sound of it startling her. She hadn't laughed like that in years, a laugh free of bitterness or apology. She pressed a hand over her mouth and felt tears prick her eyes, but she let them fall. They were tears of release, not regret. She thought of all the nights she had shivered on that corner, convinced she would never be more than an afterthought. All the mornings she'd woken up in shelters, wondering if the world would notice if she simply disappeared. And she thought of that card, warm in her hand, a promise she had been too afraid to hope for. In that quiet, private moment, she made herself another promise. She would never again allow herself, or anyone around her, to believe the lie that a person's worth could be measured by their circumstances. She would spend the rest of her life proving that compassion could build empires stronger than steel and glass. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, and she pulled it free, expecting another pledge or thank you message. Instead, it was a photograph Marcus had sent just moments earlier. Ivy sat on the floor of her office, surrounded by books, her tiny hands patting the covers with wonder. The caption read simply, "She already loves your library." Eloise smiled through fresh tears. That little girl had no idea how she had changed a life by simply existing, by simply needing someone. In some ways, Ivy had given Eloise a reason to say yes when she might have run. She typed back, *, she is why we're doing this. Thank you, Marcus, *. The reply came instantly. * no, Eloise. Thank you. You saved something in me too, *. She slipped the phone away and turned, beginning the walk toward her small apartment a few blocks over. The night stretched ahead, not cold anymore but bracing, alive with possibility. For the first time in years, she did not fear tomorrow. As she passed a bus stop, she noticed a young woman sitting alone, her shoulders hunched, clutching a plastic bag to her chest. Eloise saw in her the same vacant ache she once carried like a second skin. She paused, considering. Then she approached slowly, careful not to startle her. "Hi," she said, her voice soft but certain. "I'm Eloise. You look like you've had a long day." The girl glanced up, wary and tired. She said nothing, but her grip on the bag loosened just a little. Eloise sat beside her without being invited, the way Marcus had once done for her. She didn't offer pity or platitudes. She just sat, allowing the moment to be enough. After a while, she said, "If you ever want to come by the library, it's warm. There's coffee and books, and you don't have to pretend to be okay." The girl blinked rapidly, her eyes glistening. "Thank you," she whispered hoarsely. Eloise nodded. She didn't press further. She knew better now. Sometimes the smallest kindnesses were the ones that lodged in a person's heart and refused to leave. Sometimes it took only a single hand extended into the darkness to make you believe you were still worthy of the light. She stood after a while, giving the girl her card, the same way Marcus had given her his. When she finally continued her walk home, she felt something settle into place inside her. A quiet conviction that she was exactly where she was meant to be. At her building, she paused on the threshold and looked back once more at the city alive with stories. Some visible, some waiting to be discovered. She knew she couldn't save everyone, but she could save someone. And sometimes, that was all it took to change the world. With her hand on the door, she thought of Ivy's tiny fingers on those books. Of Marcus's tired eyes full of hope. Of the girl on the bench clutching her bag, as if it were the last thing she owned. And Eloise smiled, knowing that this was not the end of her story. It was only the beginning of everything she was born to do. Eloise woke before dawn, her thoughts already racing with everything yet to be done. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling of her small but warm apartment, feeling the weight and wonder of her new life pressing gently against her ribs. She rose, dressed in quiet determination, and walked to the window. Outside, the city was only beginning to stir. Lights flickered on one by one, each small glow a testament to someone else rising to meet their day. She thought of the girl she'd met at the bus stop, her eyes wide and wary in the dark. She hoped she would come to the library, though she knew not to expect it too soon. It took time to believe in a stranger's kindness. Time to believe you deserved it. Her reflection in the glass was different now. Not softer, never that, but steadier. Stronger. A woman no longer defined by what she'd lost, but by what she was building. She took a slow breath and felt the last lingering scraps of her old fear dissolve into something finer, resolve. The morning passed in a blur of preparation. She arrived at the library just after sunrise, unlocking the door and breathing in the faint scent of old paper and polished wood. In the quiet, she could almost hear the echoes of her students' laughter, the rustle of pages turning, the creak of the floorboards beneath eager steps. It felt holy, somehow, to stand alone in this space that had come alive because she had dared to hope again. An hour later, the first volunteers arrived, and the building slowly filled with purpose. Boxes of donated books were carried in and unpacked. Tables were arranged for the literacy mentoring program she'd organized. She moved among them all, offering encouragement, direction, gratitude. When Marcus arrived, Ivy perched on his hip. She felt her heart lift at the sight. He watched her with quiet pride as she guided a group of teenagers through the setup of a small reading nook near the front windows. When she finally turned to him, he held up a thermos and a paper bag. "Breakfast," he said, smiling. "You forgot again." She laughed, accepting it. "Thank you. It's the least I can do," he said. His eyes searched her face. "You've built more in 6 months than most people manage in years. Do you know that?" She looked around at the shelves, the handwritten signs, the nervous volunteers who believed in her enough to give up their Saturday morning. "I didn't do it alone," she said softly. "No," Marcus agreed. He glanced down at Ivy, who was clutching a board book and babbling. "But you were the spark, and you've become something this place needed as much as funding. You've become its heart." She felt the words settle over her like a benediction. She wondered if he knew how much it meant to hear them, to be acknowledged not as a burden or a charity case, but as someone indispensable. Throughout the day, the library filled with people, parents bringing their children, elderly women eager for conversation, young men who spoke quietly and avoided eye contact, but who she knew would return. She watched them all, her heart expanding with each new arrival, each life intersecting hers, each small act of trust. Near sunset, as she helped a boy choose his first chapter book, she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned and saw the girl from the bus stop, standing hesitantly just inside the door. She looked different in the daylight, smaller somehow, but also braver. Eloise stepped forward, offering a smile she hoped would say everything words could not. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said gently. The girl swallowed, her eyes flicking to the floor. "I almost didn't, but I didn't know where else to go." "Then you came to the right place," Eloise said. She showed her to a corner chair by the window, gave her a cup of tea, and left her to rest without questions or expectations. As she returned to the main floor, she felt something inside her settle, like a door closing softly on the past. When evening fell and the last visitors drifted out, Eloise turned off the lights and stood in the doorway, watching the golden spill of lamplight fade into darkness. Marcus came to stand beside her, Ivy fast asleep against his shoulder. "You know," he said quietly, "I think she's going to be okay." Eloise didn't have to ask who he meant. She nodded. "I think we all are." Outside, the street was quiet. The city felt vast, but no longer indifferent. She knew now that lives could change because of the smallest moments. A card pressed into a cold hand, a voice willing to say, "I see you." As Marcus turned to leave, he paused. "Eloise, one day, you're going to look back at this and realize you didn't just save yourself. You lit the way for countless others." She watched him walk away, the child she loved in a way she hadn't known possible, resting peacefully against his heart. And she felt no doubt he was right. When the door closed, she turned back to the library, feeling the hush settle around her like a promise. She walked to the shelves and traced the spines with her fingertips. Once, she had believed her story was over. Now she understood it had only just begun. She would spend her life proving that no one was too far gone to matter. That even on the coldest nights, a single act of courage could change everything. And as she stepped outside into the gathering dark, she lifted her face to the sky, feeling the vastness of it all, and smiled.